All right.
There we go.
Okay. Now we're good to go.
All right. In the Q&A back in May, I asked about Docker Compose and overlay networking support. Mark's suggestion at the time was that it might be available in 6.3. Now that 6.3 has arrived, are we in a position to use overlay networking on-prem?
Docker Compose and overlay networking support in 6.3.
So Compose overall is still
Compose
preview.
is there, but it's preview, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think we added overlay networking support.
Not that I know of.
But I know that we put open networking in,
Yeah. I mean,
Yep.
but I don't know if open networking, if you can target it via Compose.
So I don't think so. This is exactly what one of our actually was trying it today, and it's not supported, I think. So we didn't add it in Compose in 6.3, as Mark apparently said it may.
All right, so Mark unfortunately
A little premature.
was a little premature on that one, so we're not quite there yet.
And if the above answer is yes, or just have it's no. Looking at docs it appears that Docker Swarm usage is promoted in the Azure cloud environment as a multi-container approach. You can use ACS for Docker Swarm.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Swarm would be, you'd have to go to Azure Container Service, which lets you stand up arbitrary orchestrators, and you'd have to pick Swarm.
Right.
It's the only way to get it that I'm aware of.
Okay, so is it possible that a singleton instance that only runs on a single node within a node type instead of having one instance on each node in the type? Singleton instance only runs on a single node within a node type. This sounds like a puzzle.
No, I mean, you just set the instance count to 1, right?
Yeah, is that all you're asking? I mean, sure.
Maybe one instance on each node in the type.
Instead of having one instance on each node. Yeah, you just set instance count to 1.
Yeah.
That's all.
Whew.
Yep.
I was really worried.
Hey, you're talking about stateless, right? If you're talking about stateless, then
Yes.
yeah, that's the case.
Yeah, so the placement constraint is targeted to the one node type,
Yeah, stateless. Yeah.
and then the instance count is set to 1.
Yep, that's it.
Placement constraints.
Easy as that.
So does Andrew get a prize because he got it perfect?
Yep. Andrew's
Placement
correct.
constraint is it? Yeah. Sweet prizes.
Any updates on on-prem for Linux for production yet? No update on this. I think we're still working through it. And
Is it behind the RHEL work or something?
I think RHEL's going to come before this. This has no ETA that we can provide right now. We're still working on it.
Fair enough.
So it's there, it's just in preview still, right?
This we don't have any documentation on how to do this.
Not even.
Yeah,
No.
we don't have a preview of that.
No,
Okay.
it's just not supported.
Okay. Let's see. What did I miss? Oh, wait, this much.
Not too much.
Okay.
We were having some technical
Yeah, we
issues.
just
I
started.
recall.
Oh, perfect. Were
Yeah,
people
you
able
put
to
it as
join?
late as you thought you were.
Yeah, great, good. I was here the whole time. See some activity.
So while they're doing it, is anything we're sitting on we can announce or talk about or?
Major stuff has been still preview stuff around the mesh tooling, things like that.
Yeah, pretty much what we released in the preview for Mesh just recently.
Some community stuff that we could talk about is that HashiCorp recently released a Terraform provider for Service Fabric.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we didn't even know about it.
Yeah.
They released a bunch of providers in Azure, and Service Fabric was one of them. So you guys can go ahead and play with that. And we could probably also announce that we're working on a Bosch provider for Service Fabric as well.
I'll look for a link, or do you have a link for that?
Yeah,
we can post that in advisors, actually.
Yeah, I can send that to you guys.
And what else? Ignite conference is coming up again
Yes.
in September, so we'll definitely be there. We got a few talks going on there. I think most of us will actually be there, so hopefully we'll see some of you guys there too. So let's see, is there a good way to restrict all traffic from external? Essentially, we have app services calling SF services. We want to make sure only our service traffic can get in. Yeah, so you get to choose what you expose out to the public internet. If you have other services in Azure that you want to be able to talk to services in your cluster, but you don't want to expose those endpoints out to the public, you can do that by either setting up a VNet internally and then deploying everything into that same VNet. That's usually the easiest way to do it. And then in your load balancer configuration, you just don't expose any ports out through the load balancer, and then nothing will be exposed out to the public that way. I don't know if there's another way that you can hook things up from app service.
Another thing I can think of is it could come from, I mean, you said like peer the VNets, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, either you peer two VNets or you literally use the same VNet in two different subnets.
Right.
That's another way to do it.
Yeah.
Either one of those will work. And then that'll keep all your traffic internally within, the Azure networks.
I don't know whether or not app services or whatever lets you actually do this.
I
But
think they do in one of their higher level SKUs, like one of the premium.
you can put it in a custom VNet.
I think you can.
The other
You'll
thing I
have
was
to
going to say
verify
was,
that, but
I don't know whether or not they correctly set their source IP when they're replying or sending somewhere. But you could, presuming that that IP is Microsoft,
Mhm.
then you could restrict it, you could put an NSG on the
True.
inbound, at least so that the inbound connection had to be coming from Microsoft IP space
Oh, yeah, that's
somewhere.
true. Yeah, okay, so that just
So
setting up
so
a
if you
network.
hit it from a random machine on the internet,
Yeah,
it'll get rejected.
yeah.
But if you hit it from, say, another Azure VM or app services or something like that, then it should be less.
So you don't necessarily need to set up the VNets, you just have a network security group that filters out any non-Azure
Non-Azure
IP addresses.
traffic.
Yeah,
as source.
yeah, that's another way you can do it, yeah.
But I think the VNet, the one VNet or peered VNets is probably the
So it does,
cleaner answer.
yeah, and it does look like Azure App Service supports VNet integration. So you should be able to deploy an application into a specific VNet. So you can take an application app service, deploy it into the same VNet that your cluster's sitting in. Suddenly they can see each other, and then just close off all your ports in the Azure load
Yeah,
balancer.
you can even take the public IP or DNS name out of your Azure
Sure, you can
load
just remove
balancer.
that. Yeah, you just have an internal.
So it just
load
becomes an internal load
balancer, or
balancer.
even no load balancer at all.
Yep.
Yeah, you just remove that from your ARM template then.
I think that's
So
probably
definitely possible.
Yeah, that's probably the way that I would go.
And as usual with these things, a couple ways that you can do it.
Let's back up to Wit. Wit said, why isn't Service Fabric able to use a large, greater than 100 VM scale set?
Oh, wait. This is actually great. Siddhanta,
Yes.
I want you to answer this one.
All right. So
I had to. Oh no, I'm the problem. The reason is that I educated Siddhanta on this the other day, and now I want to see if he was listening to me at all.
Oh, is this the why isn't Service Fabric
Or
able to
just-
use large?
Yeah, or just
100
nodding,
skill
or just
set.
nodding politely for several hours.
we've had like numerous discussions on this, so I think I understand it pretty well. So pretty much when you in Azure, how virtual machine scale sets work is when you deploy more than 100 VMs in a virtual machine scale set, they get placed across different placement groups. And when that happens, the logical FDs that we get don't match the actual, like, we have no idea which FCs actually the VMs are being placed on. So as a result of that, Service Fabric, when you run your application on Service Fabric, we can't guarantee, like you won't know how much of your application can go down at any given point. So certain applications might go down and they might be part of a single FD, and you can have random downtime as a result of this. Yeah.
And so this is also related to why we don't we don't recommend you ever run a single service across multiple VM scale sets. It's because the same restriction kind of applies. The FD information that comes back is not comparable. And so since it's not comparable, Service Fabric doesn't know how to safely place things anymore. You might see one Azure rack or one Azure top of rack switch fail, and it impacts multiple instances of your service for some reason. And normally you'd never expect that to be true. So today it's a safety thing, and we're working with the rest of Azure Compute to get correct metadata back out of the infrastructure so that we can enable this. And we're also trying to figure out if there are cases where if you, the customer, understand the risks associated with this, we just let you take the guardrails off and do whatever you want. But we're not quite there yet. So I think that's the majority of it. There's also some weird things that happen around Azure upgrades. So you end up with multiple placement groups are doing their underlying upgrades at the same time, so you can see more correlated failures than you normally expect. And that's again a little odd, and it makes it a little hard to predict how much capacity you can expect to have down at a time. So because it's not safe and it's hard to predict, today we just worked with the compute team to ban it, and we're figuring out ways to make it safe going forward. And yeah, as Marcin
as a worker.
points out, yeah, you just create tons of VM scale sets with 100 apiece, and then your cluster looks really weird, and your placement constraints are a little weird, but you can absolutely make that work. But yeah, we're working on fixing this long term.
Cool. Let's see, Marcin. Oh yeah, I saw you this morning. I don't know if I'm crazy or you're crazy, but I saw you on the call, which was at what time? Afternoon for you, 4:30 in the morning for us. So
Good.
you're a beast, Marcin.
Well,
Or
we run him dry.
Mark was the only
briefly.
one crazy enough to actually join on our
Yes.
side here.
Yeah. He doesn't know what time zone he's in.
I know what that joke's.
Okay.
No types within a specific network or use reverse proxy.
Yeah, I think that Andrew's also answering some of the ways to get the app services things to talk directly to your service fabric services. Same sort of deal. Those types of things will work. I think that the multi-network VNet peering thing is probably one of the simplest ways where you can put them all in the same VNet.
Yeah,
Same thing.
you'd still need that VNet if you want them to talk directly to each other without
Right.
exposing anything. I think what you're proposing, Andrew, sounds like app service would have to call in through a gateway service that you would write, which then would talk to the backend services. So the backend service would be isolated from the internet, except through this gateway service, which would be exposed to the internet, and then app service could talk through that. So you could do it that way too. But then you do have some public internet.
Then you have to filter it a little bit.
Exposed
Yeah,
Yeah. Plus you have an extra service and a few extra hops to worry about. I would probably just put them in the same VNet.
if possible.
Seems simpler, but
All
that can
right.
work too.
You guys are going easy on us today. This is great.
You must have got you got a lot of questions in the morning call.
Well, Marcin did.
Yeah. I see.
Those are usually the hard ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So let's see, I guess, yeah, the mesh stuff coming up in Ignite and some of the networking stuff is probably the next big stuff. Do you have any, I mean, I don't know how many people know about the Envoy integration work, timelines
Yeah.
for that sort of thing.
Yeah, so
Or the
we'll talk
resources
about
model, we can talk about that.
more. We'll talk about that at Ignite a little bit more. We'll probably have something to show as well. So it's been a long time coming, but we're making some pretty good progress now. So
Cool.
check that out at Ignite for sure. And .NET Conf too is something that's coming up.
Who's going to that?
So I will have a session there. Are you doing that? Okay, yeah. So Sudhanva and I will be at .NET Conf as well. So it's a virtual conference all online.
I was gonna say, where is that one?
Yeah. It's everywhere and nowhere.
It's on the internet.
Yeah. So we'll definitely show some cool stuff there.
And resource model, resource descriptions for Service Fabric applications?
Yeah, so I mean that's out now. That's something you can start playing around with now if you have the version of the runtime that supports it. So if you install I think what we ended up calling the Service Fabric Mesh SDK, it gives you this special version of the runtime that has support for this new application model that we've been slowly building out. I believe those two SDKs will eventually converge back together.
Yeah.
So you won't have two separate installations to worry about that. But if you do install that Mesh SDK, you can start playing around with some of the new stuff right now. Which will make its way back to the regular Service Fabric runtime, and that will be kind of the way to do applications everywhere. Because that's the nice simplified way that you can actually deploy anywhere you want.
With all the crazy crap that I've built over the
Yeah,
last few
exactly. Minus
Great.
Matt's crazy crap.
years. Yeah, minus the internal crap, but that's cool.
Yeah,
and I think we'd love to get some additional eyes on that, some additional validation, see
Yeah,
if people like it, don't like it. So I would say give that a shot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We did a lot of house cleaning there.
Yeah.
So there may be things missing that you need, and if that is the case, first let us know.
Yeah,
Tell us what's
I don't expect it to be as bad as a .NET Core type situation.
Yeah, no, not quite like that.
But if there are things that you're expecting to see that aren't there, either we just haven't had a chance to put them in yet, or we intentionally remove them, and we'd love to hear your feedback if that's going to work
Yes.
longer term. So we got a question from Mark.
Yep. This one.
Constant warning in the event logs. BAP on node. Outpost. Fabric backup not enabled.
It's the backup app.
And
So-
send a request with activity. Huh. I don't know this one.
Yeah, I wonder, so, Mark, there was a preview of a Service Fabric backup and restore service that you would deploy in your cluster. But I'm wondering if you actually ever did that, or if you've never had the backup and restore service, then I'm not entirely sure what this would be.
Morning, guys.
Hi there.
Hey there.
We are using the backup and restore service, and we are actively using it for a couple of our services in our clusters. And it might be since that point in time that these warnings started making an appearance.
Okay. I'm curious then, we can figure out what this is. If you haven't already, I would open up a GitHub issue for it, and we can get it assigned to Raunak and Naveen, and they can take a look at it. I feel like this is probably just some weird race condition where it's trying to back up a service that can't be backed up at this exact moment. And then maybe that's causing something else, but we can figure it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, but that's a good one. I'd have to look. Yeah, it's a new
I
one.
haven't seen this one yet.
Well, good. I mean, somebody's trying it out. It's good.
That
Good
is
feedback.
good.
Yeah, it means it's
We
doing
like that.
It's doing what he thinks it's doing, except it's also generating these weird errors. So
Right.
we can go figure that out.
Right.
Right, that's good.
Also, Marcin wrote a really good blog on Service Fabric and Kubernetes, which I wanted to call out.
I think he's promoting it right there,
Oh,
actually.
there you go.
Oh, perfect. Wow, that time it was pretty cool.
Okay, so with regards to service health reporting, what are the implications of manually reporting unhealthy on a specific node? For example, if dependent service went down, would that node still appear in service fabric DNS resolutions? Would it still be returned as a possible remote endpoint? So typically you wouldn't report health on the node though, right? You do it
Yeah.
on the service or the application. So the health system is primarily designed to make upgrades safe. So it has the DNS service and service discovery and traffic routing, they really don't look at the health system at all. So you'll still be able to send traffic to services and applications that appear either in warning or in error. So all that really does, if you report warning, doesn't really do much.
Paint some yellow on
Yeah.
SFX.
Yeah, throws some little yellow triangles your way. That's mainly for your own information. If you hook up a monitoring system or something to that, you can get alerts.
Right.
But that's separate from Service Fabric.
Yeah, you're looking at the traces that you generated, you're
Yeah.
seeing health errors and warnings, and then you're using that to
Yeah.
drive pagers.
Yeah.
On
And the error one is the one that actually does something. So when you report error health events, that mainly only impacts the upgrade, application upgrades or system upgrades. And all that you're doing there is the application is saying, I'm in an error state after doing some checks. So if an upgrade is going on, you probably deployed some bad code or configuration. So either roll it back or stop and wait for me to come in and check it out and do something. So really only during upgrades is when that unhealthy status or error status really matters.
Really matters.
Yeah, typically we haven't done a lot in terms of, the data plane and traffic request routing. We're getting more into that now, and so we might make use of the health system a little bit more in this space. But up until now, at least, if your application is in an error state, it does not affect traffic routing at all.
Yep.
Unless your code specifically does something about it.
Yeah, it like filters out ones that are unhealthy or something.
So I mean, you can do that. You can do resolve service partition, and then you can ask what's the health status of all these, and then choose not to send traffic to those. But that's code that you would write. The system itself doesn't do anything.
But I want to go back to something Vaz said at the beginning, which is that normally we wouldn't see you reporting health on a node.
Right.
If you had let's say if you had a watchdog that was running on the node, and it was looking at available disk space, and it was seeing that there was no more available disk space. And that's a case where I would say, yeah, I'd expect that watchdog to report a health error or warning on the node saying, hey, this node isn't healthy because its disk is getting full. Or I have some basic telemetry where I'm periodically writing to the disk and seeing it, how quickly it goes. And sometimes it takes a really long time. Maybe that's a warning that you would emit saying, hey, for some reason this machine's disk is slow. But when you report health, we expect you to be reporting on the entity that is unhealthy, right? So in this case, the node is probably fine if I understand what you're saying. You should be reporting on the service that needed that dependent service, right? That's the service that is actually unhealthy because the dependent thing is missing.
Yeah, I mean, you report it on the node, the service could move to a different node, and now what?
Right.
So it's really the service itself.
It's usually the service
Yeah,
or something else.
Yeah, the entity that you're reporting on.
Right. So I would just say, just think about if the entity that you're reporting on is correct. It doesn't make a huge difference again because of the fact that we're just using the errors to drive upgrades. So if you were in the middle of an upgrade and that dependent thing blew up because it was getting upgraded, and you reported error on anything really, then the upgrade will stop and things will roll back. But I would just make sure that the entity that you're reporting on is really the one that's the unhealthy thing. That'll make the investigation make more sense.
Yeah, there's actually there's a pretty good doc that covers the health system. The health system is actually very, very, very flexible and intricate. There's a lot that you can kind of configure and work with it. I'd recommend reading over that. That'll it goes over a bit of what Matt talked about reporting on the right entity and what it affects when you do that. Take a look at that one. It's a long one, but there's a lot of good information in there.
Cool.
There is also one exception for the warnings being only painted. Because if you set treat warning as errors during upgrade, it's kind of tricky because it can make you can ruin your own upgrades this way, in an easy way. Because, for example, I'm using warnings to report stuff like expiring certificates, and I have used treat warning as errors without delta upgrade, without delta health. And it of course made all upgrades impossible. So
your upgrades are very unlikely to succeed in any large system with warnings that are on.
I wasn't going to mention that setting because we strongly discourage people from ever using it. It's not like where when you're doing a compiler, it's maybe a good idea to turn that on just so you don't end up having a bunch of warnings. In this case, don't turn that on. That's never a good thing.
Usually the only time that flag strictly exists for a made-up scenario where what if my code has a bug where the bug is that I'm reporting warnings when I should be reporting errors. And now I need to upgrade, but I don't want to cause the problem that if I cause the problem that I'm trying to fix, the upgrade won't notice it.
Yeah, you lost me.
Yeah, it's awful. It's a catch-22. But yeah, I would not normally flip that flag. But anyway, we'll figure it out.
All right.
There was a...
let's see, where are we? Health reporting.
Back up. Bruno.
More. I think it's
Bruno.
Yeah, there we go. So I was looking for Envoy on Service Fabric, but it hasn't had features for Windows yet. Do you have any forecasts about that? Nowadays, we have some applications running only on Windows, but decent traffic. So at this point, we've ported Envoy 1.6 over to Windows. It's not the latest. Envoy's up to, I think, 1.8 now, so we have a little bit of catch-up to do, but they're moving very, very quickly, and they've made a lot of significant changes in the time that we've done our work. So we're sort of catching up to them. There are a couple issues that we have still in the Windows port that we're just working out, but hopefully we'll get that pushed up to our fork on GitHub fairly soon. And stay tuned right around the Ignite conference and possibly the .NET conference. We'll give you a little bit more information on what we're doing with Envoy and some of the new features we're letting up. So
that's about 4 or 5 weeks,
4 or 5 weeks out. Yeah. So that's all starting to come together real nicely. So just hang on a little bit longer, and we'll have some good stuff for you pretty soon.
Okay. Question from Mark. When you're using Elastic Heartbeat to check the port endpoints of Traefik at 5-second intervals, Traefik sits on every node next to the port. We're seeing IO extensions appear occasionally. Itself. Wondered from a cluster perspective, if you might zoom in for this. I'm not familiar with anything. I haven't seen that one too often. I have seen it on when the TCP connection is actually getting shut down or aborted for some reason. If you get caught in the middle there, sometimes those requests can fail, which of course would chain up to HTTP as well. But I haven't seen this a lot, and I haven't seen it, consistently. I haven't seen many issues on Trafic complaining about this issue either. There is a Service Fabric sub-channel in Trafic's Slack. You might consider going there and seeing if anyone in there has seen it. That's where I would take that one. I feel like it's probably something with Trafic, you're right, but I haven't seen anything consistent.
Trafic.
It's
pronounced traffic.
That's not how you spell traffic, though, so I'm confused. I'm a simple man.
Wait, man, I was going to say Trafic.
The A and E are like combined, and I forget what that.
Yeah, it's like demons.
is called. Yeah,
but those are demons.
Demons.
Oh no.
Those are demons.
Those are
Oh
demons.
no.
Oh, no,
Those are demons.
Oh, no,
And that's
no.
traffic.
No.
What is that?
All right. Meet in the alley for the fight later. Actually, deal with it then.
We're
Yeah, I know,
both
right?
gonna lose.
We're both going to lose. The answer is anytime you have this fight, everybody who participates loses.
Yes. Where are we?
Except when you're right, then you win.
Yeah. No one's ever right.
Thanks, Steve.
No one's ever right. Depp. We're going to call you Depp.
You just elevated my status in society like 100-fold.
Do you have any idea when the new reliable collections for the resource model will be available in preview? Namespace demo to build was Microsoft Service Fabric Reliable Collections. So this is the reliable collections as a library rather than as a thing I have to derive from a bunch of crap in order to use.
Right. So again, at right around the Ignite conference, we should have something that hopefully will be usable in a preview mode. We'll at the very least be demoing what's possible. So that's coming out fairly soon as well.
Yeah, I'd say around .NET Conf and Ignite, right?
Yeah.
Getting close.
Getting close.
And that's another thing, just like the existing resource-based programming models or packaging descriptions, I think that's the sort of stuff that we really love feedback from the community. So the more you can kick the tires on these things and let us know if it's got what you expect or if it works like you expect, the better. That helps us make sure we're building the right stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Question from Whit.
So let's see, I read through documentation that describes how one can use custom metrics to dynamically modify how partitions are distributed across a cluster, and look through a demo of Ocelot posted on GitHub showing how they can be used in a multi-tenant scenario. So with that in mind, how frequently will Service Fabric attempt to shift the services around? Does it do it at some specific interval, or will it constantly reshuffle, but honor services that are finishing something up?
Shall I?
Go for it.
Yeah.
All you.
So the short answer is it only does it as often as you tell it to. However, the default amount of time is 1 second. So by default, if you haven't done anything else, every 1 second the cluster resource manager is looking for imbalances and trying to correct them. The other thing is that what's an imbalance? The default level of imbalance is that the cluster resource manager wants it to be perfectly evenly spread. So if you get a little bit more workload here, it'll try and figure out a way to spread it somewhere else. This is all adjustable. So we don't normally see people muck around with the intervals, how often things check. But we do see people change the thresholds for what constitutes an imbalance. Like how imbalanced do things really have to be before the cluster resource manager swings in and tries to level everything back out again. It's also worth noting that there's different strategies. Balance is the default, but we also have a mode called defrag, which tries to consolidate the load on as few machines as possible. And you can actually mix and match these things. To make it even better, there's modes around reserving some number of empty nodes or empty space in the cluster and then balancing or defragging the rest. If you look in our docs, there's a whole bunch of docs under the Cluster Resource Manager. Docs like how to balance your cluster, managing metrics, just the Cluster Resource Manager intro. I'd recommend taking a look at those, and they lay out a lot of the different options that are available in terms of, these timers, how often they run, what they're checking for, and what knobs you have to control it. So by default, every 1 second it'll look to make sure things are even, but that's vastly configurable. And your point at the end there, you're absolutely right. When Service Fabric moves things around, whether it's for an upgrade or for cluster resource management balancing or for any of these things, it's always intended to be a graceful operation. So you might see the new service instance get stood up, say the primary moves over to that one, and then the old one gets shut down. So your service doesn't really see any disruption or interruption. If it's a stateless thing, you'd see the new instance come up, and then the old one would get closed, and that closes an async call, so you have time to drain things out and finish the work that you're doing in the background.
Yeah, if you're using our C# APIs, the Reliable Services APIs, we will signal in that run async method. Yeah, we will signal the cancellation token before we shut you down. So we allow you that period to kind of finish up whatever work you're doing. It's a little tricky for a couple of reasons, though. One, if you're doing stateful, the state provider, the reliable collection state provider, is already closed.
Yeah, that gets shut off pretty quick.
Yeah, that gets shut down first. So you can't write anything into reliable collections after that cancellation token has been signaled. So that's one thing to be careful about. And then the other thing is the platform typically needs you to be pretty quick about shutting things down. So we give you about 4 seconds before we issue a warning, and that shows up as a health warning, health event. But we won't actually kill your process for, what is it, like a week?
3,000 days. I mean, it's forever.
Yeah, something like that.
It feels forever.
Yeah.
10 years.
10 years.
Roughly.
Yeah. So we won't kill the process, but we will complain about it.
Yeah. You get a warning pretty quick.
Yeah. So we do expect things to kind of shut down pretty quickly. And if you have a communication listener open, like a socket or a web server or something, that iCommunication listener interface, that pattern that you would implement in reliable services, that has an open and a close. And so again, we call close, and then we wait for that close method to complete before we shut everything down, before we actually move the replica somewhere else.
Yeah, they're async methods, so we intentionally give you a lot of time to complete because we don't know what the workload is actually doing.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, if it's a guest executable, I think that's just a Control-C.
It's a Control-C, and you don't have too much time to react to it before the OS is going to kill you.
Yeah, so that's a little bit different. Same thing with containers, I would imagine. So those will shut down a lot quicker. But again, if you're in that reliable services world, for better or for worse, you're sort of tightly integrated into the Service Fabric runtime and lifecycle. So you're participating in Service Fabric's lifecycle when you write reliable services code. And so it's a very cooperative environment. So that's why we give you the cancellation token, and we expect you to honor that and to shut down fairly quickly, and we won't actually aggressively kill you. But if you're outside of that world in the guest DXC and container land, then you're kind of outside of the lifecycle. So it's better because there's less of a chance that a bug in your code will hold up a upgrade event, which might be a cluster upgrade, for example. So that could be a system upgrade or an OS patch or a security patch or something important like that, where if you're not honoring the cancellation token, that thing could get blocked for days, and so that's no good. So you get an opportunity to respond, and you get more time to respond, but on the other hand, if you take too long and you don't respond, that can cause all kinds of problems and issues.
Yeah.
So if you're in the guest DXC or container world, you're not really part of that anymore. We just shut you down, and there's less risk overall to the system health.
And for the most part in those worlds, you don't have the collections or... It's expected that the load, if I kill this thing, it's much easier for that load to go somewhere else.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. Worst case, you might have outstanding HTTP requests or something, but if you design your applications to be, or you design those APIs to be idempotent anyways, they should be repeatable. So your clients should be able to repeat that operation without any risk or data loss, which is different than if you're using reliable collections, obviously. But even in the reliable collection sense, I mean, we give reliable collections a chance to finish up its replication operations that it needs to do. But once it gets to your code, when the cancellation tone gets signaled, that's already done. So it's really the same. It's just kind of a similar situation. You're only just closing out any requests, outstanding requests you have.
Yeah.
And finishing up
and this
your
is always the race,
So,
right? If we give you an infinite amount of time to gracefully shut down and you're still accepting traffic in
Right.
during this time, you never complete.
Right.
So
And then we never complete,
and then we're
that
just
becomes
stuck.
Then the whole system can get bogged down, and that's an issue. Right?
So at some point the gates got to get shut down, and for stateful things we encourage you to shut down in a timely manner by not letting you do any more work as the primary.
Exactly.
So I think that again it's kind of like we tried to step back from being as graceful as possible while not letting things take forever.
Yeah.
But we're still pretty generous on how long a given workload gets before it will actually shut it down forcefully.
Pretty generous timing. Yeah.
Yeah. I dumped a bunch of, to the earlier conversation about metrics, I dumped a ton of landing pages in around metrics and configuring things. Those are starting points. There's a bunch more docs in there. But you can ignore them for now, but some bedtime reading for you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Light reading.
Yeah, some nice light reading, yeah.
So let's see. So this is follow up on Andrew's question, I think. So it says the node itself is okay. The service or its direct dependence may be unhealthy.
So this is before when he said that he was setting the node out unhealthy. I think he meant he was actually setting the services on the node.
Yeah. That would make more sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think in this case, I mean, what Vaz is saying is right, which is you can still pull the DNS service and then pull the HM to say, hey, are these endpoints belong to service instances that are healthy or not, and then influence the logic that you use to route a request.
You could.
Yeah, but it would be something that you would have to implement. It's
Yeah.
not something that's built in right now.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know if Trafic does it by default. I don't believe that they do, but they might.
I can see Vaz.
Cool. Feelings? You get feelings?
Feelings.
No.
I
He's just trying to avoid the traffic on the way home.
Nice.
That's the Trafic. Oh, that sounds correct.
The traffic on the way home. Good one, Deb.
That's why you just spell. One of the running rules of like API design and product naming is like don't try to make it a pun, because invariably you get stuck in conversations like this. And nobody knows what to call the thing. It's just chaos.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody other than the person who named it will get the joke.
Maybe that is a joke.
Something about durability tier, pros and cons. If I understand the failure detection correctly, bronze durability tier means that live migration on the Azure host OS may lead to node being detected as dead, shut down, and workload reconfigured.
So yeah, live migration is one of those new things that only just showed up in Azure. Anytime the VM is paused, if it's paused long enough, it's possible that Service Fabric's normal failure detection kicks in and marks the machine as dead. What will happen is when it comes back, it'll be told that it's dead, and it'll cycle anyway. So in environments where the durability tier is not bronze, live migration is actually disabled for this reason, so that you have the stronger guarantees of the durability tier around whether or not machines are going to shut up, start, and shut down in reasonable amounts of time, and whether they're alive or not. Live migration makes that a little harder, so you kind of have to opt into one world or the other.
So his feedback is that this doc doesn't actually cover it.
It probably doesn't, because live migration launched this week, I think. So we got to go and update that.
Yeah.
Question from Bruno.
Are there any? Is there a possible way to share disks on different machines? I want to use a database like EventStore, Redis, and share the database for all machines. Try to use skill set that I some error I can just. So I don't know of a way at the VMSS level to take a disk and share the backing store across all of them like a network drive.
Yeah.
One thing you can do this with volumes though. So if you're running an application inside of a container, you can mount a volume in the container and have that backed by storage. You point them all to the same storage location and they'd be sharing the same space. It's kind of dangerous to do this though, because if you have like instances of Redis all trying to write to the same location, you're going to have this weird situation where You basically have multiple primaries that are all kind of clobbering each
Right
other.
contention or
Yeah,
step, at best, if it's handling it correctly, you have right contention,
yeah.
where a bunch of writes are gonna fail because something else wrote first. In worst case, if it's not handling it correctly, then you lose information because you wrote a value
Yeah.
and then I come in and
You
stop a
overwrote
value
it.
right over top of it.
Exactly.
Some workloads don't care, but most of the time,
It's for cache.
yeah,
Cache only.
it might be possible to do. I think volumes are the only way out that I'm aware of.
Yeah, it's the only way I know to do it.
I mean, you could also just be using, rather than doing this, you could just be using the like Azure Redis cache service
Yeah.
and calling into that thing.
Or a reliable dictionary.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
If you want to keep it local, then a reliable dictionary is the only way.
Yeah.
That I know of.
Right.
The enroll Redis cache went away a while ago. So if it's a Redis cache and it's specifically Redis and that's all you're using it for, the Redis cache service from Azure is a pretty good answer. If you're really looking for local storage that is local to the cluster so that it's fairly easy to read, we'd recommend deploying, your own containerized Redis thing into Service Fabric or just using a reliable collection, some service that serves as that cache, and writing over your own API to that service instead.
So, although we don't have a good answer for you, Marcin does, as usual. So it looks like, yeah, he's covered this in his blog. I assume here with persistent volumes and the Service Fabric HA volumes. Yeah, so
Yep.
those are going to be the volumes that you mount in a container.
Yep.
Right.
Which you can just basically point to the same location.
These are the
I
volumes.
assume that's what you meant, Marcin.
These are the volumes that are backed by the block store, right? Not.
Either would work.
Either one should work.
I would think.
Yeah, no, either one should work. Because today we do have the Azure Files one that you can use for this.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Azure Files one would work today.
Yeah.
The downside is that you'd have to have some service running in a container that mounted that as its drive.
Right.
And then you'd still be talking to that service as if it's in the cluster, but really it's this remote store.
Yep.
But that would work.
Yep.
I don't believe that Azure Files will work due to the optimistic locking.
Again, it depends on what he's trying to do with it. I mean, if it's just like an append-only thing, then that might work. You're right, though, that I don't know if they actually support multiple mounted locations, it being mounted from multiple locations at the same time, and how that plays with the writes. So you might have to get a volume per instance of the container.
Yes, I believe that shared file system is a bad idea here, especially the CIFS due to the optimistic locking, yes? And on the other hand, the block shared volume driver should work because I'm not sure if it's I'm not sure about its implementation because I haven't seen it, but I think it should work as long as you use a single instance of database for high availability, yes? If you use multiple instances, then it gets hard again.
Yeah.
And then you should use different volumes, and then you should use replication from database, leader election from the database, and all the stuff, and it's get more and more complex.
Complicated. Yeah. I mean, maybe Bruno can tell us a little more about what he's actually trying to build, but if it's really just a cache and locality isn't a thing, like he's fine with using a backing store, then just using the Redis service is not a bad answer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the simplest way out of the box, and it will just work.
And also as an aside, Marcin, Azure Files only uses optimistic locking for SMB mounts. If you do the REST-based mounts, then it's last write wins.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
That's why we haven't seen it.
Yeah.
That's a neat little
Caveat.
yeah.
Important detail.
That's great. Changing the protocol changes what it can actually do.
And if you try to mix and match, like if you try to use REST-based on something that's SMB mount, good luck. You can get pretty hairy.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so maybe that's another way out.
Yep.
If you really want that local mounted volume feeling.
Yep.
Rather than calling it a remote service. Okay.
All right.
Doing good.
Doing good.
Doing good.
I think there's a follow-up coming from Bruno.
I like this new relaxed pace.
Yeah,
This is good.
Nice.
It
fill that
advantages
out.
of splitting it up. Well, this is because we actually have it 12 hours apart now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
4:30 a.m. in case you were curious.
He knew.
Mark was there. Yeah, he was there.
Yeah.
I saw him send a message to Mikko at 4:40 in the morning. I was like, what are you doing?
Oh, jeez.
I was there.
Oh, God.
I stayed the whole time.
3:30.
What? Yeah. What time is that for you, Whit? Is that 3:30 local? No.
I couldn't do this.
No, we're going to do it all.
No, I mean, not, what I'm saying is this call will be an early call.
Yeah. We can do it.
They can do it at 4:30. It's many times.
We're still trying to gauge, I think, where
Whenever you want to
everybody.
wake up.
Yeah.
I think we're still trying to gauge where people are.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're trying to balance
we want
everything, yeah.
trying to
Find the
balance
optimal-
everywhere, the sweet
Yeah.
spot.
Yeah, find the optimal set of times. for
Trying
these
to-
things.
It is Martin.
Poland. Marston's in Poland, yeah.
What do we got?
Where is it? Australia?
Australia, I think.
This time is good for Australia.
This is,
That's what they said. Yeah.
yeah, because it's the morning tomorrow, right?
Still too early.
6:30. Yeah, it's pretty early.
Yeah.
And does this one work okay then? We're trying to make sure that at least if one is if one is okay,
Is it good?
if one is terrible, then the other one is fine. We're trying to get those the boundary cases worked out.
Program or US books.
So
Still doing great. So this time does work for us.
yeah,
Australia.
Thanks. Thanks for that.
yeah, that was great.
Pass it in.
Added a lot of value.
Thanks. Anytime.
Keep it classy deep.
These are being recorded.
Yes.
Okay, you're
Fine, I'm allowed to cheer.
Yes, you're allowed to share.
Oh dear.
So let's see. I guess other updates are things. Oh, I'll give some other future looking stuff.
How future?
We don't know,
What?
so probably quite far.
Sometime.
Probably quite far.
3,000 days.
Yeah, for one forever.
Is this the part of the call where Matt lies to everybody?
Well, no, I would never do that.
But it's not an NDA though.
I've been doing this long enough that, we know to say if it was going to preview Ignite, I'd say I think it's going to preview Ignite. But this is more like these are long-standing features that we actually have some traction on now. Things that are starting to get worked on again after a while. So things like in-memory collection.
Yeah, that's true. We were doing that. Yeah.
That's coming along. So we're getting some work there.
Yeah.
A simple thing, but a thing we haven't had previously was like a TTL on the dictionary. So you could say, I'm going to put a TTL on this row when I write into the dictionary, and then after that amount of time, that data just gets automatically deleted.
Great for
Rather than
caches.
people having to write all that. It's boilerplate code.
It's,
stuff
it's
that's
great for caches.
Yep, great for
Yeah.
caches.
You got in-memory collection plus TTLs, you got a cache.
You've got a cache.
That's
You're
it,
done.
yeah.
Trying to figure out ways to improve the configurability of the collections. Right now, you kind of get a collection. So if I wanted, TTLs this way, time to live. So
Yeah.
not that one. More like a time-based one. So if I haven't touched this record in 10 minutes, just delete it. So if you have hot rows that are getting updated all the time, they live. If you haven't touched a record in a while, it gets deleted to save space. That's it.
What I actually mean is that the TTL implementation in RocksDB is opportunistic. I mean that it's done during the compaction only, so it saves a lot of resources because it's only done when the database is compacted, and that's
Right.
really a nice
Yeah.
approach.
So we're investigating whether we want to do it live or whether or not we want to do it on what we would call checkpoint, which is kind of the same thing. The first one will probably just be an active one, and the reason that we want to do it there is because first of all, it'll offer a tighter guarantee on the time frame when the removal will actually happen. The second thing is that if we model it just as a transaction that happens in the background on your behalf, you get transactionally consistent behavior on the primaries and secondaries. The primaries and secondaries in Service Fabric can actually compact or checkpoint at different times. And so if we drove the TTLs based on compaction, what could happen is that if you were doing reads on your primaries and reads on your secondaries at the same time, you would see different results, and that can screw up all sorts of things. So we're going to start with it being driven by the primary, and it being basically just a background task that is scanning with some resolution for records that should be removed, and then spinning transactions to transactionally remove them. And we might do a background-based one later for cases where the number of records that need to be removed, or just the sheer load of doing that additional transaction work becomes too much. But for right now, we're opting for what we know will give a transactionally consistent semantics for both the primaries and the secondaries. That's what we're starting with. Again, this is kind of a thing where we're going to get the feature out there, and then we're going to, look at feedback. And so there might be a mode eventually that you can flip on where it says, do I do the TTLs actively, or do I do it in a background manner?
Is there a default? Did you?
We haven't set it yet. And Marcin, yeah, that's another thing that we were going to talk about doing, which was doing local, so not wall clock, and then if it is expired locally, just filter it out of reads. And again, those are options that we're going to provide probably eventually, but the first thing to do is just to get a basic transaction there where it will remove it correctly at roughly the right amount of seconds after it was last touched locally. And that will work provided that your local clock isn't smearing itself around too much. So if you say 10 seconds and we're scanning every 5 seconds, it should be within 15 seconds that you see the thing actually get removed. And unless the local clock is getting smeared, where a second isn't a second's more like a minute, then you're in pretty good shape. We recognize that is the expensive way to do it, and that we could do it more efficiently in the background, but you lose some of that timing, which we understand you don't really have in the first place. But also we would have to figure out how to reconcile the different compactions happening at different times on the primaries and secondaries. And to avoid that, we're just going to do it on the primary based on this timer, and that'll be the basics. We'll start there.
Let's see.
All right.
Bruno, is there any performance loss using Docker containers on Windows and Service Fabric for .NET applications? He says nowadays we're using apps directly, but we want to migrate to Docker.
Performance loss. It probably depends on what your application's doing. That would cause performance loss. Writing to disk, maybe.
Yeah, we've seen a little bit of CPU overhead related to the virtualization.
Yeah, I would think there'd be some. Yeah, it's probably
It's
negligible.
It's non-zero.
Yeah.
Certain workloads get hit more. So if you're talking to devices, if you're talking over the network,
Yeah.
some of those.
Yeah, there is a layer of abstraction there, so it's always going to cause a little bit of a performance hit. Probably the most noticeable that you'll see though is downloading the containers into the cluster when you first spin up the application, because the packaging format, that containerized packaging format, generally tends to be a lot bigger than just the .NET application itself, because you have operating system components in there. And the Windows images are still pretty big. So your initial startup time before the container image gets cached on your nodes, that initial deployment takes a few minutes.
Yeah, can be longer.
Yeah.
I just say make sure to trim your Docker images down to the minimum number of layers.
Yeah.
Remove anything from the OS that you don't need. So
Don't take the full 10 gigabyte.
Yeah, try not to get the full Windows Server image if you can avoid it. But yeah, things like that will impact that startup time, especially.
Yeah, I know we have. So when we do builds, when we actually build Service Fabric in a container versus not in a container, we see a little bit of a performance hit. It's not all that big though. I think that's mainly because we mount the source on a volume, so it's mainly that reading from disk performance that suffers the most. I don't think the CPU usage is hit all that hard.
Yeah, you don't see it. It's more that running the container causes some CPU usage because you're virtualizing some things.
Yeah.
But the CPU consumption within the thing is generally not impacted.
Shouldn't be.
It's just another process.
Yeah. Exactly.
There was actually, I
But
think we missed.
as usual, collect data and measure and see how it affects your application.
I would say always test your application when you move it between these types of environments. Just like if we're going to move it from physical machines to virtual machines, or from VM size 1 to VM size 2, you do that perf testing and you see how much of an impact you actually have and try to figure out where it's coming from.
Yeah, grab a baseline outside of a container and then
see,
compare.
I think we're good, Matt. I don't think we missed anything. Wit's going to take us home. That'll be the last one.
I thought there was something from Mark up here that I missed. Digging into the fabric
digging into
traces.
the traces. Search type transient exception. Okay.
Purchase does not have read access.
Yeah, post it on
No, he
GitHub.
said he's going to post it. That's why.
Yeah.
Post it on GitHub. That'll be easier for us to dig into.
Yep. But yeah, it sounds like at the time the backup happens, the partition might not be readable temporarily, which can happen. And I don't know whether or not the backup and restore service is handling that correctly, but we can look into it.
Yep.
Okay. Last question of the day.
Yep.
Is it possible to use service remoting to communicate with a service running inside a Windows container, or must I communicate with it only over HTTP?
Well, you can use any protocol you want inside a container. The remoting stack that we have requires that you have the service fabric runtime available to it. So that means you have to be running a reliable service that inherits one of those stateful service or stateless service base classes. And I believe that you can do that inside of a container today, so you should be able to do it. I haven't tried it myself.
I haven't tried it since we previewed it.
Should be possible.
I haven't tried it since we previewed it a while ago. There's a guide on our docs that shows how to get the collection, or sorry, a reliable service running inside of a container. I would follow that. There isn't anything that I know of today. I will say that I think this is one of the things that we kind of want to straighten out in the new SDK, so that you can more easily use Service Fabric's components inside a container. Whatever we have out there, I know is still in preview, and I know we're gonna change this a little bit to make it easier.
Yeah, it's not very straightforward right now to get reliable services. That whole runtime thing running inside of a container, it's pretty involved. So I probably wouldn't even recommend going that route if you can avoid it.
Yeah, I'd say if you do it, it's a preview of the experience. The result will be a preview of the experience we want to have.
Yeah, and I know at least in the future, with the new resource model, the runtime will not be available inside of there. So reliable collections will be. You'll be able to use reliable collections inside of containers when you use the new resource model. But the full Service Fabric runtime won't be available to you there. So if you're kind of looking in that direction for your own applications in the future, I would probably advise start looking at writing your applications that are sort of neutral to having to depend on the Service Fabric runtime as much as possible.
Are you referring to the mesh stuff?
It's a little bit of both.
Service Fabric Classic or whatever it was.
Yeah, I mean it's a bit of both. So when you move to this model of describing services with these, with this resource YAML files, you'll be describing a container in there, and that model won't support the full Service Fabric runtime that you see today. So components that depend on it, like service remoting, won't necessarily work in that environment unless we kind of reconfigure or rewrite a lot of it.
Yeah.
So if you have other options available to you, like gRPC or HTTP, those will probably be better solutions for you in the long term.
Interesting. So that resource model is coming to the, I guess, again, Service Fabric Classic, traditional, whatever it's called, in addition to the mesh side?
Yeah. So think of Service Fabric Mesh. Think of Mesh as just another environment to host your Service Fabric applications. But the resource model that we're designing and developing now, that's the one that's meant to be universal across any Service Fabric environment. So that will run everywhere. And that's why it's a little bit more limited than the manifest model that we have today, because there's certain things that won't work in the mesh environment. And so it's almost like .NET Standard. If you write your applications and target .NET Standard, that guarantees you can compile against .NET Core or full .NET Framework or whatever else supports the standard. So the resource model is kind of like that. It works universally everywhere, has a few limitations or a few things you don't get in it, but most of the things you need to write applications are still available to you, and that includes reliable collections, that includes all the configurations you get around code packages and endpoints and all that kind of stuff. So It's just when you do, when you're writing reliable services today and you're inside of a, stateful service class and you do this dot something, this dot code package activation context or fabric runtime.
Yeah, I go get the static fabric runtime type that exists somehow magically.
Like you can grab the runtime and go look at a node and then go and disable it. So obviously in the mesh environment, that's a big no-no. And so this resource model is meant to be universal everywhere, and so we don't give you access to those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have gRPC or HTTP as an option to you, I'd probably look in that direction because that'll make your applications the most portable.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess going forward then, should I be starting to transition away from service remoting? Or will that still be covered?
It's up to you. It's kind of where you want to head with it and how portable you want the application to be. So if you're looking for a transition to Service Fabric Mesh or even to be able to run it outside of a Service Fabric environment, say just
local testing.
Yeah, local testing, or even just on a like an app
Build
service
box
instance or something. That'll be the most flexible and most portable. Or if you have polyglot services, if you expect to write services in other languages, for example, you want them to be interoperable. That's another good reason to look for something that's agnostic to. That's kind of agnostic to the platform it runs on. So yeah, that's generally my recommendation. If you're happy with remoting now, then you can continue to use it. It's not going anywhere. But it'll be the most restrictive of your options.
Right. Thank you.
All right. So real quickly, guys, any articles on implementing the Redis cache with Service Fabric? I can't find anything.
I know we had an example of this, but I don't have it as a sample or something. We can talk to Manny and see if he can publish whatever he did.
Yeah. So if we find it, Bruno, we'll get it back to you.
Yep. And Compose, we have no date. We continue to find things and fix them and improve support, but it's not GA yet.
Yep. Okay. That's that. Woo! Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And we'll see you at the next one.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, Lawrence. Okay, Lawrence is pretty good.
Oh,
so,
Lawrence. Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Great.
Pretty good.
Cool. See you, everybody.
Oh, that's one?
See you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.